All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patty Alvarado. I am the adult librarian at the Benjamin Franklin Public Library. Welcome to the third NeiSci Tuesdays program. I'm happy to be back and be part of this series once again. I want to take some time to thank our Library Foundation and our behind the scenes staff for helping us bring these virtual programs together for you. So please note that this program will be recorded. By entering, you are consenting to your likeness possibly appearing in the promotional materials for the Los Angeles Public Library. If you do not wish to have your likeness appear in the recording, please keep your video or sound off. As I mentioned before, during the presentation, video and sound will be disabled, but we will enable both features during our Q&A session. So the Benjamin Franklin Library is located in the Boyle Heights neighborhood on First in Chicago. We are a neighborhood science branch, but unfortunately our branch is currently closed for a good reason. We are undergoing a complete interior renovation. We hope to open next year in 2023. We do realize that our community is in need of resources, so we started having weekly visits from the LAPL Street Fleet Wednesdays afternoon in our parking lot from 1 to 5. So the Street Fleet is a pop-up library, and we provide computers, Wi-Fi, story time, reference assistance, and more. And a small collection of mostly children's books will be available for checkout. And hopefully soon we will have hotspots, so Wi-Fi for checkout purposes, and Chromebook bundles, meaning you can check out a Chromebook along with the hotspot, and that's all for free with your library card. We do hope to open up a temporary location near the branch, and it will be in operation up until our actual branch opens. You can go ahead and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our handle is on the screen. If you have any questions, you can always email us at bnfrnk@lapl.org. So let's do a quick overview of NeiSci Tuesdays. NeiSci is short for neighborhood science. And neighborhood science, it's most commonly known as citizen science, but it may also be called community science, crowdsourced science, contributory science, or street science. So pretty much what neighborhood science is research that's conducted by non-scientists, non-professionals, and just people like you and me. You don't need to be a standout student in science or math or have a science background or degree in order to take part. Nature and science is all around us, and all you need really is interest or curiosity. And it also helps to find groups of people that are already doing the work and learn from them. That's pretty much what I've been doing for the past 2-3 years. I've made friends with a lot of people who are into science and nature, and I've been learning so much from them. NeiSci Tuesdays is a weekly program series that brings awareness and contributes to scientific and sustainable practices in your neighborhood. The NeiSci Tuesdays program series runs from March 22nd to April 26th. If you enjoyed today's program, you can go ahead and click on the link you see on the screen to register for our other programs, or you can go ahead and scan the QR code to register. So today's program is really, really important to me and to my community and to all of LA. It was created to raise awareness on the Exide battery recycling facility located in Vernon, California, which contributed to widespread contamination of lead and arsenic for decades up until its closure in 2015. The environmental disaster has left residents facing chronic health hazards from exposure to airborne lead that has settled in the soil and has impacted over 10,000 homes on the east side and southeast LA. So disparities in lead poisoning across racial and socioeconomic status is well documented and still remain today. The communities impacted by Exide are more than 90% Latino, working class, and rank among the top 10 of most environmentally burdened areas of the state. Our 4 guest speakers from Eastside Communities for Environmental Justice in USC will discuss this in more detail and how our communities are using science to hold polluters and the government accountable in cleanup efforts for our communities. I'm really excited to introduce them to you all today. So we have Tiff Sanchez is a member and the Eastside Youth Organizer at Eastside Communities for Environmental Justice. Tiff is a lead organizer for Youth in Action, Eastside's youth program on the East Side. She is the recipient of the 2020 Planting Seeds of Change Emerging Leader Award. Tiff is a third generation Angelino with roots on the East Side. Citlali Islas, she, her, is a junior at Roosevelt High School. She has been a member of Eastside Communities for Environmental Justice's Youth in Action Club since 2020. She has participated in the Lab Cert Youth Program. Citlali is a recipient of Eastside's Planting Seeds of Change 2021 Emerging Leader Awards. Venecia Ramirez, she, ella, is currently at the USC Division of Environmental Health as Research Coordinator, advancing community research capacity and education through multiple community engaged participatory research studies throughout Los Angeles County. She resides with her family in Southeast Los Angeles, Tongva land, who originate from Mexico and wishes to devote her life to continue to dismantle the environmental inequities impacting her community. Our last speaker, Mark Lopez, he, him, his, was raised in the Madres del Este de Los Angeles, Santa Isabel, Mothers of East LA, Santa Isabel, or Melasi, an organization co-founded by his grandparents, Juana Beatriz Gutierrez and Ricardo Gutierrez. Mark joined Eastside Communities for Environmental Justice as a member 3 years before joining the staff, where he served as lead organizer, co-director with Eastside's co-founder, Angelo Logan, an executive director for over 6 years before taking his current role as Eastside Community Organizer and Special Projects Coordinator. Mark is the 2017 North American recipient of the Goldman Environmental Prize. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mark.
Cool. Thank you, Patty. One, for the invite to speak with y'all. But two, just for being a really dope community member. I think even before getting to today, I've really enjoyed the conversations we've had. So just like, wow, I've never felt so welcomed in a library space. So just really appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
For sure. And thank you to everybody who showed up. At some point, you'll see some contact information if you want to get a hold of us, if you want to find more information. Feel free to do that, but I think we'll get into it. And again, feel free to throw questions or comments in the chat. And then at the end, I believe we'll have a kind of Q&A. And sorry for the phone ringing in the background. I'm in somebody else's office. So Tiff, I don't know if you were going to share the screen. And also shout out to everybody on this panel. I'm like, damn, y'all are dope. We're all dope. This is dope. Yeah, so get the lead out. That's the title of today, right? The aftermath of the Exide-led contamination disaster and the next steps. So go ahead and hit the next slide. So this is the kind of table of contents. This is what we're going to be covering today, which is just giving you some more context about what is Exide, right? Then we're going to talk about the Get the Lead Out project, which is a specific project we're doing right now, a research project. The Lab Cert program, which maybe some of you will have the opportunity to participate in the future. And then the XRF explanation and demo. So that's the actual technology that we're using to test lead in soil, right? So we'll go ahead and get into it. So this here is the location of the Exide facility, right? For our friend from Australia who joined us and our homie from Norco as well, and others who may not be from the area, it's really important to locate Exide. So Exide is located in an area called the City of Vernon. It is just southeast of downtown Los Angeles. And so it's actually right in between the communities of Boyle Heights and unincorporated East Los Angeles, which is the east side, and Southeast LA, especially Maywood, that's like snugged right up against it, right? And so these are the communities that surround it. And it's important to understand that these communities are low-income communities, communities of color, communities that have been targeted for these types of facilities, and are really what we call environmental racism, right? Which is basically these types of facilities that contaminate us tend to exist in low-income and communities of color more than anywhere else. And so we're burdened with that. And because of that, we fight back, right? Can you hit the next slide? So Exide, the facility, you can kind of see a picture there from the top left corner. That's the outside of what the facility used to look like. And in this picture, you can actually see some of the emissions, right? You see that stuff coming out. And so this actual area, this facility, this building, this kind of structure, operated as a lead smelter since the 1920s. It was not called Exide. The Exide company did not own it since the 1920s, but that's when it started. And then over the years, it changed ownership, it changed names, but for the most part, it kind of maintained its operation as a lead smelter. You see there that it started operating without a permit in the 1980s. That doesn't mean that it had a permit before the 1980s. Well, what that means is there was actually no permitting process. So the laws didn't exist to regulate, right? To kind of monitor these types of facilities and make sure that they're not harming us. They were just kind of allowed to do really terrible things when it comes to impacting the water, impacting the land, impacting the air, and impacting our health, right? But when these laws start to get passed at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, these types of facilities are supposed to comply. They're supposed to start following the law, right? Exide did not do that. As a matter of fact, it never did that in its existence, right? And so when the Exide company took over the facility in the year 2000, they continued to operate without a permit. Now, what's important to note is, so what if they had a permit? If they were allowed to contaminate us anyways, who cares, right? Well, there's an important piece of a permit that's called financial assurances, right? So part of the permit has to do with science, right? What are safe levels of lead that we can be exposed to, which is 0. There is no safe level of lead. But the government agencies still debate how much, a little bit of lead, it's just a little bit of lead, right? They debate our health in those ways, right? The other part of the permit is a lot of math. It's about money, right? So if there was gonna be a disaster at Exide, how much money is it gonna cost to deal with the disaster? So if they had a permit, if they were forced to complete their permit, they would have to complete the science side and the math side. And because they never had to do that, what that means is they didn't have a plan, a financial plan, money, so that if a disaster happened, our communities could get the resources we need. They never had that. So when our communities face this disaster, to this day, we haven't gotten the resources that we need to make sure that we deal with this appropriately, right? Hit the next slide. So I'll hand it over to Venecia.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'll be going over the health impacts from lead. And lead is a potent neurotoxin. So that means it alters the structure function of the nervous system. So in other words, it can cause nerve damage. And other potent neurotoxins that are commonly known are snake venom and pesticides. So lead can be very dangerous to our human health. So just to even examine the impacts that lead has on the human body, on the brain, any exposure is linked to hearing loss, damaged nerves, and brain damage. For the bones, lead exposure can impair development and the actual health of the bones, which can slow growth in children. In the stomach, with high lead levels, it can lead to intense abdominal pain and cramping. For the heart, there's a higher risk of high blood pressure in adults who experienced lead poisoning as children. And in the blood, it leads to the reduction of oxygen flow to our organs, which causes rapid heartbeat, fatigue, dizziness, and shortness of breath. And this is because lead inhibits the production of hemoglobin, which is a protein in our body that carries oxygen to different parts of our body. Next slide, please. And just as Margot's mentioned, like, this is environmental racism, and unfortunately there are other places like Exide throughout in other states, and they are predominantly in communities of color, lower income communities. And those who are most vulnerable are those who are actually working in those facilities or around those facilities. It can be children and infants, because their bodies are still developing. They still have to develop fully. So while they're developing, their development can be impaired through that lead exposure, especially to pregnant women. And if we go to the next slide, the impact that lead has on pregnant women can be severe, because that means the impacts of lead can go past one generation onto the next, and that's already happening. And there is the Truth Fairy City done with Eastside Communities and Environmental Justice in USC, and it was found that neighborhoods with higher soil lead levels had higher teeth lead levels, and this happens when babies absorb the nutrients and the toxins to which the mother is exposed. And this just shows how lead can be so detrimental to the health of everyone. And even with the impacts of lead, just as Mark said, there is no safe level of lead in the body. And once you are contaminated with lead, there's no way to remove that lead from your body. So there is no magic pill, there's no treatment you can take to remove that lead. So the health impacts are with you for life. So the children that are exposed to lead can experience headaches, memory loss, high blood pressure, kidney disease, and joint pain as an adult. So the impacts of lead contamination are very severe, which is why it's so important that, you know, it was so important that that fight to close on Exide was because for the health and well-being of all of our communities. And I think that was pretty much it.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. So the fight to shut down Exide and clean up. If I gave y'all all the cheese, man, about what it took to shut down Exide and in this cleanup, we would be here for days. Literally, I could talk for hours. It's too much, right? So I'm gonna give y'all some quick points. You can see the slides gonna have some additional info. But you know, Patty mentioned the mothers of East LA, Santa Isabel, early on. My mother and my grandmother actually toured the Exide site in the 90s. So they went into the facility, and the folks who worked there were like, everything is safe, everything is fine, don't worry about it, right? And so my grandma kind of made the point and said, if everything is safe and fine, then why did we have to put on all this hazmat equipment, hazardous material equipment, head to toe, everything covered, right? And the people from Exide were kind of like stunned, like, oh, damn. And then my grandma asked, and if we have to wear all this equipment to protect us, why aren't any of the workers wearing this equipment to protect them, right? And so that was an indicator for our communities that if the company didn't care enough about its workers to protect them, then it definitely doesn't care enough about our community to protect us, right? And so Eastside in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, really was pushing the City of Commerce, the City of Vernon, the county and South Coast Air Quality Management District, and the state. So these are all government agencies, right, or government cities, to try to get them to shut down Exide, right? Because it was known, the agencies had been monitoring, they had detected high levels of lead coming out of the facility, right? The facility was essentially throwing car batteries into a huge blast furnace, right, to melt away all the plastics and then try to get the lead metal out so that they could reuse it, they could recycle it. It was a recycling center. That sounds great, recycling center, right? But how they're doing the recycling is really important. And so in this blast furnace, literally little bits of lead were coming out of the smokestack, out of the top of the building. And whichever way the wind was blowing, that's where the lead went, right? And it went into our communities. And so remember how early on I mentioned this idea that these agencies are like, a little bit of lead it's okay, it's not too bad, right? So we actually had to push the agency, the South Coast AQMD, to lower the amount of lead that is allowed to be put into our communities, that's allowed to come out of those smokestacks. And so we were successful in getting them to lower that level of lead, right? And we were pointing to the impacts of health and saying, you're letting too much lead out into our communities. And so because of that, they actually shut down the Exide site temporarily because they didn't have the technology that could filter out the air enough to prevent all that lead from coming out into our communities, right? And there was a state agency that was in charge of whether or not Exide would get a full permit or not. And in 2015, they still hadn't made a decision, right? And what's really important to note is in a conversation, what they told us was, give us all of your legal arguments. And we were like, what? Why would we do that? If you keep Exide open, we're going to sue you. And they responded by saying, well, if we keep Exide open, you're going to sue us. If we shut Exide down, they're going to sue us. So we're going to make our decision based off who is it easier to fight in court. And that was so shocking because, of course, a billion-dollar company, multi-billion-dollar company is going to be able to fight in court way more than we are as a community, right? But because we were able to put a lot of pressure, right? We were out in the streets protesting, we were going to hearings, we were partnering with our friends at USC who were giving us kind of the scientific data and perspectives to be able to share. Later that year, the Department of Justice, which is a federal organization, they actually shut down Exide permanently. They actually caught them. They had evidence of them committing felonies for years. They were breaking the law and poisoning us in the process for years. So they were able to shut down the company and then were able to get $9 million for the cleanup. Now, $9 million might sound like a lot. It is very little. And I'll talk a little bit about that next. Can you hit the next slide? So that was the shutdown, right? Now we want to talk about the cleanup. So in 2014, before the shutdown, again, the state agency, the Regional Air Board, they already knew that Exide was poisoning us. They already knew that. And so we were able to push them to start testing homes, right? And it's a long story with all of that. But essentially, the state likes to water down samples. So what they do is they take a sample from here, a sample from there, a sample from over there, and then they mix it up. And then from that, they take one sample. Now, what that means is if there's a sample that has a lot of lead and there's a sample that doesn't have a lot of lead, when you mix them together, it's going to water it down. Right? So it's going to make it seem like it's not too bad, right? So in that process, they're not finding hotspots. And that's what we were pushing them for. And even though they tried doing it that way, the amount of lead they were finding was so high, it had to be treated like toxic waste. So this is people's front yards, people's backyards, people's side yards. It's toxic waste, right? Where kids are learning to throw a baseball, riding their bikes, planting corn and chiles and whatever else, right? Playing with carritos or whatever. That's toxic waste. That's what we were dealing with. And even though we knew that, the state only wanted to clean up those 2 homes. So we had to push and push and push, and we were able to get them to expand to about 50 homes. And then we had to push and push and push. And luckily, through the county dedicated $2 million to testing homes. They were able to test 1,000 homes, I think. We were able to get them to push out further to 219 homes and then to start sampling to see if they needed to clean up further to 10,000 homes, right? And that we finally got in 2016. Now, what's interesting is the state had the information showing our communities were poisoned, but when they presented it to us on a chart, they made it seem like, no, this isn't lead from Exide. We don't know where it's from. There isn't a clear pattern in the data, right? And the problem with that is, to be honest, when I was in that room hearing that data, I just accepted it. I was like, damn, okay, I guess there isn't a pattern here. I guess they can't say Exide poisoned us all. Luckily, Dr. Adam Love from Los Angeles County, he was there, and he said, nope, hold on, I got my own presentation. I took your data and I actually isolated it for the wind model. That means he looked at where does the wind blow? That's where you're gonna find the highest samples. So he isolated that and said, take out all the low samples that are in areas where the wind doesn't blow. Let's look at where the wind blows. And he found a pattern. And because he found that pattern, literally, as soon as his presentation was done, the leader of the state agency got up and said, okay, we're gonna clean up 10,000 homes, right? So if he hadn't been there with that information in that room, we'd be in a different fight right now, right? And then once we had that, then we had to shame Jerry Brown. We had to shame him. We had to take to the streets, protest him. He came to our communities to open up a casino. He was gonna cut the big red ribbon, but he wouldn't meet with us about this huge disaster. So we had to protest him, and that, along with other stuff, led to him giving us $176.6 million for community cleanup. Now, when I say he gave us, he didn't actually give us that money. It goes to the state agency, and then they do the work to actually do the cleanup, right? But at the same time, we ended up passing what we call the battery fee bill, which essentially now, if you go buy a car battery, it's gonna charge you an extra $1. Now it's extra $2. Those $2, wherever you're at in the state, goes to cleaning up our communities, right? So we have to figure out ways to collect money, and that was something like $40 million a year is what's collected, right? So we had to figure that piece out of it, and then we were able to work with USC through the Truth Fairy project, and now the Get the Lead Out project, to get data, to get information, to push, right? Because again, from the beginning, with the permitting, it's about the science and it's about the money. So we figured out some of the money stuff. Now we're having to work on the science to get them to push further. And the latest update is that the state has now given $540 million. So over $500 million to the cleanup, right? So remember when Exide gave us 9 million? That was nothing compared to what's needed. And this 540 million isn't gonna clean up all the 10,000 homes. We're gonna need more. And in a little bit, we'll talk about how we're gonna need more, right? Go ahead in the next slide. Oh, and this is how we did it, right? We were out in the streets. We were up in the public meetings. We were in meetings with elected officials, with agency people. We were working on the science, we're working on the math, we're in the news, we're doing everything we can to fight this, right? But a key thing I like to tell people is we needed to use math, a whole lot of math. Because when the state would give us information, they would give us data, we had to look through it and actually calculate it ourselves. And a couple of times we found them lying. We found them lying about numbers, in particular about some of the schools in our communities. Right? They were saying they weren't contaminated as much as they actually were. We had to go in and find the results and do all of that, right? So it took a lot of fighting to be able to do that. Hit the next slide. Cool. So now to talk about the Get the Lead Out project. If you see here, this is a heat map on the left, has the Exide Technologies facility, little picture there in the center. And you can see that the areas that are orange reddish are the areas with higher amounts of lead. The areas that are cooler, right, green, blue, still have high levels of lead, but not as high. And so what we find is this is generally the direction that the wind blows, north, northeast, right? And so what we figured was right now, the state has sampled over 8,000 homes. Of the 8,000 homes, more than 97% of those homes need to be cleaned up. So what that tells us is they haven't gone far enough, right? They haven't found the edge. Where is the edge? Where does it say, all right, cool, there's not that much lead here anymore? We need the state to keep cleaning up until they find that. And so if you look at the map on the right, that red area, right, that red line, that's the area the state is currently cleaning up. This blue bigger circle, that's the area that we think is actually contaminated, right? So that's more than double, probably quadruple the amount of homes. So it's gonna take billions of dollars to actually clean up the lead from our communities. But we're committed to that because we know they only wanted to clean up 2 homes. And then they only wanted to clean up 50. And then they only wanted to clean up 219. And right now they only want to clean up 10,000, but that's not gonna stop us, right? And so part of the work that we're doing right now and some of what Tiff's gonna talk about and what Vanessa is gonna demonstrate is we're collecting soil samples from out in these areas. So if you live in these areas, right? Boyle Heights, unincorporated East LA, Monterey Park, Montebello, Commerce, Bell Gardens, Cudahy, Southgate, Maywood, Huntington Park, and some parts of South Central and unincorporated LA, hit us up, right? We'll come out, we'll sample your soil and let you know what you got, right? And if possible, we'll help you, deal with how to make sure that if there is lead in your soil, it's not coming into your home and it's not coming into your body, right? And so that's the work that we're doing right now. And so if we are able to find that there are high levels of lead outside of the area the state is cleaning, then that gives us more information, more data to be able to push on the state and say, hey, you need to come further. That 10,000 isn't enough. You need to keep coming out further and further. And that's been a lot of what this Exide struggle has been about. It's been about trying to get the state to follow our lead. And so in this case, we're going way further than the state. And then we're gonna pull them along to follow our lead, right? And part of the process of this is we also have to figure out what we're gonna do as a community, right? Exide got shut down in 2015. 7 years later, most of the homes contaminated still have not been cleaned up. It's a slow process. So for me, I live about 3 miles outside of the Exide area. I'm gonna be waiting years. So in that time, I'm just supposed to sit with all this lead, right? No, we gotta find community solutions. How do we support each other in trying to make sure that we're not being contaminated, right? So part of our research process here too is talking to community members to figure out, cool, so that lead's there, we're gonna fight the state to come clean it up, but what are ways that we prevent the exposure, right? What are ways that we can use science, right? Can we use plants that maybe like eat up some of that lead and can take it out of our homes, right? There's a new project dealing with mushrooms that are also pulling lead out of the ground. Maybe we can use that, right? Maybe we just need to cover it, right? Maybe we just need to cover the ground and make sure no lead comes into us. Maybe we need to grow certain foods that we can eat, right? Like spinach and cilantro and other heavy greens, right? That help us deal with lead when it's in our bodies, right? Those are all things that we're talking about right now to try to find solutions to this, because we can't just wait around for the state to come clean up, right? We have to be active in this and use all the information, all the tools we have accessible to us. So now I'm gonna kick it to Tiff. You could actually skip the next 2 slides, Tiff, and go right into the lab cert.
Thanks so much. I totally forgot that we were on a panel because Mark is such a good storyteller, y'all. And so, yeah, there's always, every time I hear about, Exide and what went down, right? There was very few people that were there. I always learned something new too. So I always appreciate you, Mark, for spitting knowledge like that. So hey, y'all, my name's Tiff. I'm the Eastside Youth Organizer at Eastside Communities for Environmental Justice. And we have this program called Lab Cert. It sounds very official and very cool, and it is. So basically what we did is we teamed up with Occidental College and USC, and we were able to put together a really cool program for youth specifically. And basically what it is, it's an opportunity for youth to get involved in the cleanup. And the science part of it and the data collection part of it. I have with me a youth member from Roosevelt High School, Citlali, and hey Citlali, and it is really awesome. And so she was a part of our very first lab certification program. And so basically what it includes is a 1-hour training on how to collect soil. It's virtual, it's done virtual because we're still in the panini. So it is a 1-hour virtual lesson on how to collect soil the scientific and ethically correct way, right? We want to make sure that people don't scoop it up with their hands. We want to make sure that it's sealed correctly, that there's certain parts of the house or your yard that we actually look for, places that have runoff water, you know, close by to like, you know, your roof where it drips down, places where children play, things like that. And so it's the 1-hour training. And then we actually do the sample collection with folks from East Yard. And so can students from outside the impacted area? I'm reading impact areas volunteers. That's a really good question. That's a really good question that I think Mark and Vanessa would be more equipped to answer on the chat. Go ahead.
I'll put it in the chat.
Perfect. And so it's the actual soil collection. And then this really cool part here. So if you could see this, this is them collecting soil. This is inputting the data and different stuff. And then right here, this cool little remote control looking thing is the XRF machine, which I think is so super important because it's awesome. The way I explain it to folks, it's like, it's the George Foreman grill of, of measuring contaminant, right? And particularly in this case, lead. And so it is what it sounds like. You hook up this machine, you put your sample in, you close it, you set it and forget it, and you push the button, and you know, a minute later you get instant live data results of the soil that you collected. So it's a really cool machine. And I think it's super important for youth to be able to have access to this sort of machinery and this equipment, right? And also for folks to see people like Vanessa that do awesome research within our community and know that there are amazing women of color, people of color collecting data and doing important work with our communities and for our communities. So I think that's super important as far as diversity and representation, right? As Vanessa shared, she's from South LA as well, or I'm sorry, SELA. And so the work that she does not only is important, but it holds a lot. It's like very dear to her heart. And she believes in the power of community. So yeah, so I'll kick it off to Citlali to kind of share with us her experience on the lab certification program that we have, and it's called Learning Action Building Community Engaged Research Training. That's the fancy long-winded title of the program, but I wanted to kind of ask, like, Citlali, like your experience in this. What was the first time that you actually heard about Exide?
The first time I actually heard about Exide was through one of the East Yard meetings.
Yeah, that like where myself or Mark was at?
Yes, I believe you guys were giving a presentation and I was like, what is this?
Yeah. And then like, you know, I think we use a lot of big terms like environmental justice, right? And so like, what do you think about when you hear terms like that now, or terms like environmental racism?
I think like when I would first hear them, when I first heard environmental justice, it was like I would just think about like pollution and like the streets. But like now I see like the different aspects of it. and like how it's not only just like plastic, but it can also involve like different criteria, like it's like
Like lead in the soil.
yes.
Soil. Can you describe like this picture here of the cleanup that happened? It was one of the biggest cleanups, and it happened to be where you live. And can you kind of describe like what that was like showing like you a student, right? And how I like how Patty said it in the beginning, like you're also a scientist, right? You're a student, but you're also a scientist. And so the USC folks kind of leaned on you to like show them where the best soil samples should be taken. What was that like?
I think it was a learning experience because I didn't know how to do this, and I guess it was like nerve-wracking just because they were the professionals, and I was just like guiding them through where like the youth sensitive areas were so they could test the soil. And in the picture, I believe she has like it's like a little hammer, and she has this other thing. I don't know. I don't know the specific like name for it.
Terminology. Uh-huh.
Yeah, but she was basically hitting it so she could like scoop up dirt, and then they would put it in a plastic bag to send it to the lab.
What was the last portion of like the lab certification was like testing the actual soil. Like
Yes.
what was that like for your like experience?
I think it was it, it was like there was mixed feelings because it was cool that like we got to use this technology and how the results came instantly, but when you look at the result it was like, why are the numbers so high?
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah.
Yeah. But overall, like the process of like working with like USC and Eastside and the folks at Oxy, uh, how was it? How was the experience?
I think it was a really fun experience just because I got to branch out more because I got to like it was a different learning experience because whenever I learn things, it's mainly in a classroom, and this one was like out, and I got to interact with professionals and professors.
Yeah. No, thanks, Citlali. Throw some emojis in the chat for Citlali, y'all. She's a very shy person, so this like doing this is like it's awesome. Exactly, we're all experts in our communities, that's right. So thank you all so much. I'll pass it over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Tiff, and thank you, Citlali. And I do want to echo Mark's comment in the chat. Just as I guess the people from USC, like they were teaching how to soil sample, USC has a lot to learn from you, Citlali, and other community members. So you have a high amount of credibility, you have the expertise. So I hope you recognize yourself and having, like you have such importance in this. So I hope you recognize that, Citlali, and you're doing amazing. So I'm really proud of you. So with XRF, it stands for X-ray fluorescence. It's this portable machine that can be used to detect lead levels, but it's not just lead, it can be other elements that are usually found in the periodic table. And the book definition, it can be a little jargony, but it determines the elemental composition of materials by measuring the secondary radiation emitted by a sample when excited by a primary X-ray source. So what does that mean? I don't know. We'll go to the next slide and we'll figure it out. So basically, the XRF, it emits this radiation. So it's X-ray radiation. So you will hear like X-ray when you go to the dentist or the doctor, and it's actually similar levels of the X-ray that you go when you get like an X-ray. So it emits that into that little brown cloud, which is supposed to be a soil sample. And then that soil sample emits back that X-ray radiation. And you see it's pointing to a computer, because fortunately we've been able to figure out how to connect the XRF to the computer. So as the XRF is analyzing the lead levels, we can see it real time on the computer screen. And what's important to note is with the XRF, you can take it out to the community and measure the lead levels. It's a pretty accessible and convenient way, but just to add that extra precaution, we do like to keep it like in a portable stand, because when we keep in that portable stand, it locks in that radiation, so you don't get that secondary radiation as you were to do it if you were like pointing it at the ground. So having it like in a portable stand, we keep it at the lab at USC, but we're happy to take it like out of school, or we've done a workshop like at the Eastside office, and that just helps protect everyone from experiencing that secondary radiation that's caused by the XRF. And if we go to the next slide, so these are an examples of other heavy metals or elements that the XRF can determine and analyzes it. So you can see at the very bottom for lead, the limit is 8 ppm. So if there's a soil sample that is below 8 ppm, then the reading will say that's then LOD. LOD stands for level of detection. And that's something we do take into account when giving the report back and giving the soil sample records. And for the overall steps, just as I mentioned before with the soil sampling, and then we air dry the samples. We air dry them overnight for a couple days. If they're really wet, we'll air dry them for a couple weeks. And it's in a Ziploc baggie, so it's very accessible to take soil samples. And then we analyze with the XRF, and then we download the data, and then we share the data. And to help kind of demonstrate the process of utilizing the XRF, we've made a little video, and I can just walk through it. And I think there are going to be like a couple pauses while the video is being shown. So Tiff, if it's possible, maybe when I nod, we can do like a pause, if that's okay. And then we can start. That's me in the laboratory. And first things first, we want to protect ourselves. We got to put on the gloves. And because this is like in a little laboratory, if I ever leave the lab, I take off the gloves. If I go on the computer, I take off the gloves. So it's important we don't cross-contaminate, because let's just say I use the gloves to handle the soil samples and I use a computer, and I'll contaminate the computer with lead and putting others at risk who use that computer. And then you can see me getting a little wipey, very basic Lysol wipey, to wipe down the area. We wipe down the area before and after soil sampling just to make sure everything is very clean. And the specific area I'm wiping down was where we have the samples air drying. And where I'm cleaning over there is the actual place where we analyze the samples. And then shortly you'll see how I'll bring in some samples to air dry. You literally just open the bag and you just leave it there for a couple of days. And that just helps give more accurate measurements for the XRF. And then I think I'm fast forwarding right here. It's going a little fast. Okay. And then, so we plug everything in. So we plug in the XRF to the computer and then to the electrical outlet. And then when we plug in the XRF to the machine, to the computer, we turn on the XRF, we just hold on the button. And the XRF came with a flash drive where we can we pause really fast? It's going super fast. The XRF came with a little flash drive with two computer programs. So one computer program is used to connect the XRF with a computer so we can see it in real time. And then another program is used to download the data. So what you just saw is we manually connected the XRF to the computer. So it's just easier to like input like the name of the sample, the location, and so forth. So it's really convenient to have it with the computer. And then we can play. Thank you, Tiff. And before we start, we do a system check because with the XRF, we just want to make sure that it's giving accurate readings. And then once we do a system check and it's good to go, we calibrate it. So when we calibrate, we get a sample where we already know the levels of lead, for example. So that's the control sample. And then can we pause really fast? So that, if you saw it, it looked like a little cardboard. It looks like, I thought it was cardboard at first, but it's actually a SELA sample with a very thin piece of plastic. So fortunately with the XRF, it goes through plastic. So that's why we can leave the SELA samples in the plastic baggies. And likewise with this control sample, we can put it directly on there. And what this calibration helps with is each time before we do the lead analysis for the other samples, this calibration helps us ensure that the XRF is giving those accurate results. And if it doesn't, then we call it thermoscientific, which is the distributor of the XRF. But so far, the XRF has been pretty accurate in giving these readings, and we can press play now. And I just make sure it's directly in like the little light, or the XRF is actually analyzing it. And then that's the portable stand where we make sure the lid is completely shut. Fortunately, the XRF does not start if that lid isn't closed properly. And those are the readings. And then for the XRF mode, we go to SOLS and then test LGO, which has been recommended by Thermoscientific. And then once we're ready to test, we name the sample. So I named this like sample 1, location, USC. And then you can, if we can pause really fast, there, thank you. You can put like your name, you know, make you feel like a true scientist. You are already a scientist. You're already a scientist. You don't need a degree to call yourself a scientist. You're already a scientist. But you can put your name in the inspector to make it more scientific-y, anything in the miscellaneous or in the notes. But most importantly, just to name the sample and the location. And an important thing to keep in mind is just to help with the accuracy. With each sample, we analyze it 3 times, and each time we analyze it for 2 minutes. So if we can press play, it's going to show. Oh, it restarted. It's going to go to data entry. I apologize. This is really fast. Okay, so we will see the sample, and each time we analyze it, we move the baggie, so it's not analyzing the same spot in the baggie. So you'll see it's on the far right, and make sure it's directly on top of the light. Analyze it for 2 minutes, and then for when we analyze it again, I move the baggie so it's more in the middle. When I analyze it again, I move it more to the left, and you can see real time that you can see how it's measuring all the elements. That's me throwing a peace sign because we're done. So after we analyze it with the XRF, we download the data, and then once we download data, that's when we share the results. And I think this is part of the downloading the data. Yeah, I think that was pretty much it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Venecia, Silali, Mark, Tiff, for your dedication, for being part of today's program, for saying yes to me, for sharing this platform together. And just, I mean, I knew about Exide for so many years because I live in Boyle Heights, and just hearing all the facts today makes me think of all the compounding forms of oppression our communities face. There's like environmental racism, there's like the redlining that happened, housing, COVID. It's just so important for us to use our platforms to continue talking about these issues and to keep these conversations going. So now I'm gonna hand it on over to the audience for our Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. I'll read them out, or you can also raise your hand and I'll go ahead and unmute you. And I have a question from Cecilia Peña. What do you do if there is lead in your pipes?
Yeah, so that is a common issue, especially with old pipes. And unfortunately, you're essentially responsible for the pipes from the water meter out by the curb all the way into your home and all piping in your home, which is where you're going to find that, right? So unfortunately, the best thing to do is to change the pipes, which is really expensive, but it's kind of the surefire way to get rid of it, because a lot of those pipes have lead in them because lead is really flexible, and so it's part of what gets mixed into kind of old pipes before it was really understood that lead can get into your water from old pipes. Sometimes what I've come across, especially at schools, is sometimes it's not the actual pipes, it's the faucets themselves. And the faucets themselves contain lead, and so then it's coming from there. That's much easier to fix. You can remove that and bring in a new kind of faucet, right? And there have been resources in the past. I haven't kept an eye on them, but before COVID, for sure, there were resources where schools could actually request to have their water sampled, and then they could be supported to access resources from the state to be able to swap out any contaminated infrastructure. I did want to make a note too, Patty, because you kind of mentioned around, right, environmental racism, and those are things we've talked about. And I think I saw somebody tweet recently something about like social sciences are a science, right? And so a lot of what we've had to understand how racism works, and that's been really critical to us being able to find solutions for our communities, right? And also understand that some of the issues we face is not just our fault. Like, we're literally like 7 million pounds of lead got poured onto us, and that affects how we perform in school. That impacts how we engage in community. There's all these negative effects that we have to understand, that sometimes get attributed to our culture, right? That it's like, no, it's actually the lead. So a lot of that is really important to understand, along with the science, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are systems and structures that were created to oppress communities of color, BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, Brown communities of color. And we're seeing the effects of it, and it's just not stopping, and it's so upsetting. And this is why it's so important to me to bring these programs to the library and to talk about this. But there was also another question. Rainy Wood says, is there a way to test lead in water? And I just wanted to make sure we answered that. I know Vanessa typed it in the chat, but I'm not sure if everyone can see it. Oh.
Would you like me to read out loud? Would that be easier?
So is there a way to test lead in the water?
Yes, so there is. Like at UCLA, I know that they have a lab certified to test lead in water, and I'm still in contact with them. So I can, for those who are interested in testing their water samples, I'd be more than happy to help. But unfortunately, with the lab at USC, the XRF can only test for solid materials, not necessarily water. But I can help look for those resources.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, it's 5:01. We've gone over. It looks like Marcia does have a question, but I guess we can email you, Vanessa, right? So can you go ahead and put your email in the chat one more time so people can contact you if they have any questions? Let's see.
Sorry, just as a quick response, because
yeah.
it's really common. The recommendation is don't use hot water from your pipes to cook. Use cold water and then heat it up on your stove, right? Because if you run hot water through your pipes, especially for a soft metal like lead, it can deteriorate it, right? So if you use cold water, it's less likely to do that.
Okay, so that's our program for today. again, thank you so much for everything that all of you do for us. And I hope you found this program today informative and that you have learned how lead impacts our bodies and how inequitable policies and practices affect our most vulnerable communities. And always, it's my goal to motivate and inspire all of you to consider how environmental racism and injustice impacts our communities. It impacts our neighbors. If your neighbor is suffering, then you're going to suffer too. That's just how it works. So that's it for our program. But before you leave, our next NeiSci Tuesday program is the Be a Pollinator Guardian program, which is very important. We will learn from our speakers about the importance of pollinators in our ecosystem, because the ecosystem is important, and ways to support pollinators through microclimates, through creating and diverse plantings of climate appropriate plants. You will also find out how you can help scientists monitor the pollinator population in our communities and contribute to real scientific research with your smartphone. This is a really cool program. I love pollinators. I have a native garden and it's great. So if you haven't registered, go ahead. You can click on the link or the QR code. And before everyone leaves, please tell us one thing you learned today from today's program, or how this program has impacted you. I like to thank everyone once again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye.